everybody, it's Miss Phoebus, and I'm back with another ancient Greek mathematician, Pythagoras. And you probably know Pythagoras pretty well, or at least you think you do, because of the Pythagorean theorem, and he's talked about a lot. But I'm going to share some weird stuff with you. Alright, so let's start off here with our Mediterranean map. Pythagoras is born on the island of Samos, along with some, you can tell he's with some other mathematicians in that same area. So we divide the Greek mathematics into three different eras. So one where it's influenced by Pythagoras, and Pythagoras starts his own school. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but with 300 of the wealthiest students that he could possibly find. Plato has his own school called Plato's Academy, and that would be the second area of mathematics or Greek mathematics. And then there's an Alexandria school later on that flourished in Egypt, but still under the Greeks, and extended its influence to Sicily and Palestine. So Pythagoras is born around 570 BC in Samos. He died around 495 BC. Thales advised him to study in Egypt, and he worked with abstract geometric objects and numbers. He gathered his school as a sort of mathematician's secret brotherhood. So he has a school. He invited 300 of the wealthiest students in Greece, to come join his school, and he turns it into a cult, basically. More on that later. So we do have some writing in the life of Pythagoras. So let me read this to you. 22 years Pythagoras remained in Egypt, pursuing closely his investigations, visiting every place famous for its teaching, every person celebrated for wisdom. Astronomy and geometry he especially studied, and he was thoroughly initiated in all the mysteries of the gods, till, having been taken captive by the soldiers of Cambyses, he was carried to Babylon. Here the Magi instructed him on their venerable knowledge, and he arrived in the summit of arithmetic, music, and other disciplines. After 12 years he returned to Samos, being then about 56 years of age. So he went on some adventures. He started with Anaximander, learning under him. He went to Egypt, learned under them. Then he got kidnapped and got taken to Babylon and learned under them. And then he got to go home. And then he created a cult. So, it's life, I guess. All right, so the cult of Pythagoras. Some of the things that they believed about numbers may seem odd to us. For example, numbers were thought to have their own special nature. Pythagoreans thought that numbers were male or female, ugly or beautiful, or had special meaning. 1 was the number of reason, 2 was the first even number or female number, and it was the number of opinion. 3 was the first true male number, the number of harmony. 4 was the number of justice or retribution. 5 meant marriage. 6 is creation. And so they had a whole, just all kinds of personalities and different things attributed to numbers. Other ideas they worked on that you still learn about in school, even in odd numbers, and they really, really liked even in odd numbers. They really liked nice numbers, nice integers, things like that. They even played around with number patterns, triangular numbers. So we start with 1, and then we pick up 3, and 3 builds our first triangle, and then 6 is another triangle, and then 10, and then 15. So each subsequent number adds a new row of dots to the triangle, making it larger. They also played around with square numbers like 1, 4, 9, 16, and built squares and explored that kind of stuff with it. Pythagoreans also knew and kind of helped prove that the sum of the angles of any triangle is equal to 2 right angles or 180 degrees. And the Pythagorean theorem, not necessarily named after Pythagoras because he's discovered it, but rather because he proved that it would always be true. In a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the two right-angled sides will always be the same as the square of the hypotenuse. And they played around with these squares and these square numbers. And these squares were really, really nice values that you could even kind of divide up into little tinier squares. Weihart is going to talk to you about the Pythagoreans. I really like Weihart. She talks really, really fast and does a lot of cool doodles and stuff like that. But she will actually talk to you in the other video about the Pythagorean theorem and how it was more about squares than it was about triangles. So the Pythagorean theorem says that I can take these pieces, move them, and create, I know this is a little weird, but create two blue rectangles, but also notice those kind of peachy squares in there as well. Okay, so you can do a lot of things with the Pythagorean theorem. All right, the Pythagoreans were also, and by Pythagoreans, these are the people that are in the cult of Pythagoras. These are his friends, really. He comes to really have quite, not just a school, but quite a good friendship with these people. Found that musical notes could be translated into mathematical equations. They looked at octaves and how cutting a string, like on a guitar, cutting it in half, you create, certain chords and, cut it in a third and it creates a different note and things like that. The Pythagoreans outright worshipped their philosophical beliefs, going as far as sacrificing an ox after discovering the 47th proposition of Euclid. It is also said that once they discovered the Pythagorean theorem to be true and it to be proven true all the time, they sacrificed 100 oxen for that. It said that Pythagoras and his followers settled in Crotona in South Italy around 530 BC and went about making a society for themselves that reflected their unique ideals for life. In addition to this weird mathematics, they started doing some other things, like Pythagoras is believed to be the first known vegetarian, like recorded vegetarian. He believed that animal and human souls could be swapped, and his followers also believed that he could talk to animals and plants. The Pythagorean diet, in that they could only eat certain things. There's some things about birds and certain animals that they can and can't eat, but like it is absolutely forbidden for you to eat a bean. Some people don't know why, but I was having a conversation with my husband and he said it was because when you look at a bean that is sprouting and becoming a bean plant, it looks like the embryo of a person. So humans come from beans, therefore if you eat beans, you are basically being a cannibal and you're eating humans. That's a stretch. Don't know if it's true. Haven't really researched it a whole lot, but that's something we discussed the other day. Interesting stuff at my house. All right. Pythagoras also believed that a human being lost a part of his or her soul whenever they passed gas, so that might have been also why they didn't like beans. And they also wore pentagrams, so we're talking about like stars inside pentagons and maybe even circles, wore pentagrams on their clothing because they view it as a special and sacred symbol. They were extremely superstitious and mystical. They believed the human soul was trapped in a continuous cycle of death and reincarnation. It was taught that the only way to free ourselves from this cycle was to obtain a higher understanding of the universe through introspective thought and philosophical study and not eating beans. Pythagoreans concluded that the objects within reality could be differentiated by the qualities that they have. So because you have a specific quality, you are made of a specific thing. So these things were different shapes, different colors, different sizes, so the qualities range dramatically and by no means were universal. A leaf, for instance, might be green. However, not all things are green. Some things in this universe do not even possess a perceivable color. The same can be said for smell, size, or shape. So they would say that, okay, because these two things are green, they are the same. And because these two things are the same size, they are the same. And, and it's like, but they're two totally different things. They're not made up of the same stuff. So just because they have similar qualities does not necessarily mean that they're made up of similar things. However, if you go down to the atomic level, they are made up of the same atom. So there might be an argument for that in some ways. Now, the Pythagoreans concluded that the one universal quality of all things in the universe, the one thing that everything had in common, was that it was numerable. It could be counted. We could perhaps imagine a universe without smell or taste. However, the idea of creating a hypothetical universe without numbers was very much impossible. They believed that the numbers that were the underlying substance of reality, much in the same way that Thales believed that water was going to be the origin of everything in the universe. However, not all numbers are treated equally. Some were considered more holy than others. For instance, the Pythagoreans attributed great importance to the number 1. Irrational numbers were known by the Pythagorean numbers, but it was heresy to discuss them or work problems with them. Therefore, the Pythagoreans identified Pythagorean triples and only worked problems with those numbers. So irrational numbers are weird. It's just true. They can't be represented as a simple fraction since they never terminate nor repeat. All right, so this is the story of Hippasus. And Hippasus decided that he wanted to play around with irrational numbers and see what he could find. And so he was a part of the Pythagorean cult. And he is credited with the discovery of irrationality, mathematically speaking, but is rumored to have been murdered for the crime of divulging the existence of irrational numbers. So the Pythagoreans knew about them, this guy's involved, and there's a murder on our hands. Let's see what's going on. Occasionally during their calculations, the Pythagoreans would happen upon a proportion that was mysterious to them. Discovering the exact ratio of numbers between these mysterious proportions was a delight and a treasure for the members of the Brotherhood. Such finds were celebrated and lauded, and therefore the mysteries were pursued with diligent hearts. Hippasus was working on such a problem. The particular case that Hippasus was attempting to resolve was a very common proportion, but its exact calculation had stumped many great minds for quite a long time. If he could discover the ratio behind this proportion, he would be guaranteed fame and glory amongst his brethren. So Hippasus dedicated himself entirely to this pursuit, not even resting from his work while he traveled. And it was just so happened that he was sailing across the Mediterranean, he discovered his answer. He had been trying to find a ratio between the two numbers that would describe his problematic proportion, but the answer that he discovered was that no such ratio could possibly exist. The number was quite literally irrational. This discovery was revolutionary. So we have a right triangle with two sides. We have a side like the 1. Hey, 1's a great number, 1's a special number, right? Let's build a triangle where 1 is the side length. But then we're going to create a hypotenuse, that slanted side, that is irrational. So one of the principal tenets of Pythagorean philosophy was the fundamental universality of these ratios. Therefore, according to their beliefs, everything in the universe should be able to be described as a ratio between two numbers. And here, Hippasus had proven that there existed certain proportions which cannot possibly be described rationally. Excited and thrilled at his discovery, Hippasus sprinted across the deck of his ship, yelling to his brothers about his breakthrough. But when they heard his claim, the Pythagoreans were appalled. In their eyes, Hippasus had or was not only preaching heresy, but he had definitely proven his heretical claim. Where Hypasus had expected to be met with praise and celebration, he instead found fear and denial and angered. The other Pythagoreans soon built into a murderous rage, and their curious brother became the target of their ire. Look at that mob. For the transgression of discovering the truth, Hypasus was thrown overboard and drowned in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, this is a very old story. Did it happen? I don't know, but the story has been sticking around for a very, very long time, so there might be some sort of truth to it. And there's poor Hypasus under the sea, looking at a fish and trying to figure out the hypotenuse of his fin. In general, persecution of the Pythagoreans occurred. That's what we know. That's how they ended. They were persecuted. Many of the followers were killed or driven away. Their meeting place was burned to the ground. Pythagoras was forced to flee with his followers around 480 BC. It is believed that he was killed in front of his wife, but not 100% sure on that. There's lots of different stories. Later on, it's believed that the society regrouped and continued their activities, but not much was heard from them after that. It is possible that they just simply faded away, leaving behind a rather perplexing legacy of mathematical genius tempered with mysticism and superstition. All right, so here are some quotes for Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras is a weird dude, yes, did some kind of kooky things, I agree, but still a pretty big influence and a pretty interesting mind of the time. So these quotes are attributed to him, and you're going to pick one of them that you kind of identify, agree with. So here we go. There is geometry in the humming of the strings. There is music in the spacing of the spheres. The oldest, shortest words, yes and no, are those that require the most thought. Wisdom thoroughly learned will never be forgotten. Be silent, or let thy words be worth more than silence. Numbers rule the universe. Which one of those speaks to you? That's going to be part of your assignment, as well as some other questions in there about Pythagoras. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!